Hello. Today I will be talking about the disability movement and its history in America. The disability movement really began in the 1960s, and it was one of the many movements, including civil rights and women's rights, that started in this era. Before I get any further into the presentation, I think it's important to talk about what the definition of the civil rights movement is. And along with a lot of the other movements in this era, the main goal of the movement was to secure equal rights and equal opportunities for all people with disabilities. So, when we're talking about this notion of equal rights in the disability movement, it means very specific things. This includes the accessibility to public transportation and public housing. This also means the equal opportunity to live independently without the help of someone taking care of you. It means the opportunity to be employed just as much as someone without a disability. It means the same opportunity to a good education. And I think above all, it means the freedom from abuse and neglect and really violation of your rights as a citizen just because of your disability. Another thing I wanted to talk about before we really get into the history of the disability movement is what does the disability population look like in the US today? And I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that there's over 56 million Americans living with disabilities today in the US. That means that nearly 1 in 5 Americans lives with a disability. This chart provided by the Center for Disease Control gives a good overview of some of the more common disabilities in the US. As you can see from the chart, some of the most common are arthritis or back and spine problems, but also in the top 10 are blindness and deafness and deformity. And now onto the history of the disability rights movement. I'm going to start our history in California with the independent living movement. Now, this movement started in the 1960s, and its main idea was that people with disabilities were the most knowledgeable people about their specific needs. So, even though there was doctors and experts, society should really place the initiative in the hands of the people with the disabilities to take action on what they need to do to live their most happy life. The picture currently in the background is a picture of Edward Roberts, who is a spearhead for this movement in California. And he's one of the most revered activists with a disability because of his story, which starts him being refused a diploma in high school because he wasn't able to get a driver's license with his disability, but he didn't let that stop him from going on to be one of the first students at the University of California in Berkeley with a disability. Edward was just one of the many people that formed this movement in the 1960s. And the 1960s were such an important time for the disability movement because it was the first time that people with disabilities were able to become public advocates for themselves, whether that be through sit-ins in government buildings or parades like this picture. With this newfound empowerment, the disabilities movement was able to make massive gains in disabilities rights. This starts with the Architectural Barriers Act in 1968, which ensured that all federally constructed buildings were accessible to people with disabilities. A lot of historians look back at this act and see it as a stepping point for all the success that followed. The next major legislative victory for the disability rights movement was the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which followed that all federally funded programs could not discriminate against people with disabilities. This was very important for protecting the opportunity for people with disabilities to the right of Medicare or Medicaid. And as you can see in this picture, there's an activist supporting a very important clause in this act, which was Section 504. The disability movement continued to gain more momentum into the 1980s, and there was more activism than ever before, including a large-scale sit-in protesting the inaccessibility of Colorado's public transportation. This gained national attention. All of this momentum led up to the greatest achievement of the disability movement, which is President Bush signing the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as ADA, in 1990, pictured here. The ADA mandated universal protection for people with disabilities in all facets of society, including the workplace, transportation, and government services. You can see the results of ADA in our everyday life, whether that be the elevators in multi-level buildings at Overlake, Braille lettering on classroom doors, or the areas of refuge near the stairs. All of these exemplify how ADA empowered people with disabilities to fully integrate into the community. While the ADA was a major victory for the disability movement, it did not completely solve the problem, and activists continue to fight today to reduce discrimination and protect the rights of people with disabilities. If you want to get involved in the disability movement, start by connecting with local nonprofits. I personally have had a transformative experience volunteering at Outdoors for All, a nonprofit that helps people with disabilities empower themselves through outdoor activities, and I would recommend the experience to anyone. And with that, it is the end of my presentation on the history of the disability movement. Thank you for listening.